What's your relationship to athleticism and sports? How has the experience of queer people changed over time in your lifetime? How do you want it to change? The Front Runner. This begins with a long excerpt from The Front Runner by Patricia Nell Warren. Vince, Billy, and two girls were right in the middle of the floor, and the other couples were stopping and watching. The two girls were doing a rather abandoned heterosexual version of the flop. Vince and Billy were not. They were doing the gay boogie, and they were doing it as I had seen it done only in films and at parties in New York. The gay who is a good dancer can turn even the foxtrot into an uninhibited celebration of male sexuality. Billy and Vince were doing the boogie about 6 feet from their partners, not looking at them or at each other. They were dancing like blacks. They were loose, cool, with all the foot stomping and finger snapping that goes with it. Their shoulders and torsos barely moved. All the action was in the hip jerking, the crotch gyrating, the buttock twitching, and the thigh weaving. Vince was aware of the crowd, grandstanding a little, but Billy was a shade more restrained, inner-directed, as if he were dancing to that fantasy lover that every gay sees in his mind. I looked around. Judging by the students' faces, they had never seen anything quite like this before. A few started clapping to the beat, and pretty soon the whole room was clapping and stomping. I could hardly hear myself think. I watched a little nervously. On occasion, I had seen this dance progress to pants falling, the dancer dexterously flipping his goodies around and finally jerking off magnificently. I couldn't believe these two would do that, especially Billy. If they did, they'd be off the team tomorrow. At the beginning of The Front Runner, Patricia Nell Warren's 1974 novel, Harlan Brown briskly narrates the years he struggled and suffered through life as a closeted athlete, Marine, and husband, and describes how he scraped and hustled to stay alive and build a life as an openly, if barely so, gay man. How he was given a chance to coach again by a progressive-minded college president, and how all of that prepared him to fall in love with Billy Sives. Throughout the rest of the novel, we see Harlan help Billy grow as an elite runner, ready to take a medal at the Olympics, and we see Billy help Harlan grow after decades of inner conflict and social isolation, as a person who is at peace in his own skin. I hate reading. Okay, hate is a strong word. I don't enjoy the technical exercise of reading. It's hard for me. I move slowly through the text and struggle to maintain interest, especially if it's dense or requires the reader to retain multiple abstractions or statistics. And don't get me wrong, I love the experience of having read, of storytelling and artistic expression. The introduction of books on tape and then CD and then streaming through my phone changed things dramatically for me, giving me the option of leaning into my stronger, or at least more confident auditory capacity for comprehension and retention. When someone refers to a real page turner, says, I couldn't put it down, or talks about reading an entire book in one sitting, I typically respond with a mix of awe and despair. Now that said, there are 3 books that I have read in one sitting, each pushing late into the night because I just could not put it down to be able to detach and sleep. During my first year of high school, the Manchurian Candidate hooked me with a blend of political, psychological, and sexual intrigue and kept me up till 5 a.m. When I was 19, Mariette and Ecstasy was a Christmas present from my mother, and I was finished with it by Boxing Day, drawn in by its poetic and nuanced description of life in a cloistered convent and its weaving of the mystical and the sensual. And then for a college course on the depiction of gender and sexuality, I read The Front Runner. I read a chunk of it in a coffee shop till it closed. I read the next chunk of it in a campus townhouse I shared with 5 friends until they all went to bed. I drove to the local 24-hour Dunkin' Donuts for another chunk, and I finished weeping in the kitchen while I made a pot of coffee before my housemates woke up. I wept because of the plot I wept because of the raw authenticity of the love story at the heart of the book, written well before Annie Proulx published Brokeback Mountain. I wept with joy because of the window it opened to me, giving me a much-wanted glimpse of the lives of gay men. But when I realized that this was the first love story I'd ever encountered that I could see myself in, the first time I felt what the characters were feeling, feared what the characters feared. I was turned on by what turned the characters on. My joy mixed with surprise and resentment. While running and elite athleticism are central to the story, that's not what I could relate to. Warren explains that the story was inspired by a competitive runner who agonized over coming out in the early 70s, knowing it would hurt his running career. That's a fear that wasn't limited to athletes, but while other industries and contexts have seen greater openness and safety for queer people for decades, the world of sports is, to say the least, a bit behind. Billie Jean King was outed in 1981 and maintained her status as a favorite in tennis, despite having to navigate plenty of backlash. Except for outliers like Martina Navratilova, the few professional athletes of the 70s, 80s, and 90s who openly identified as queer only did so after they retired. More recently, we saw Robbie Rogers come out in 2013, Michael Sam drafted by the NFL the next year. After years of rejection from coaches and sponsors because of his transition, Patricio Manuel became the first openly transgender boxer in the US when he stepped back into the ring in 2018. And Megan Rapinoe was never really in any sort of closet unless there's one where she stores her cooler than anything lavender hair coloring. When Carl Nassib announced that he's gay, the first active NFL player to do so, it had the oomph of a big shrug. No drama, no carefully worded statement, no kowtowing or apologetics to appease sponsors and managers. Still, it was titillating news. Even the fact that it wasn't problematic for the NFL made headlines. I wasn't a promising athlete, but my dad was a great tennis player. Several of my brothers were swimmers, one even reaching All-American status. And my mom expected me to join the high school swim team, or some team as they did before me. During the first week of high school, though, tryouts for the volleyball team conflicted with auditions for the fall play. My mom told me a freshman probably wouldn't get cast, so to delay any dejection that would come from that rejection, she reminded me daily that tryouts for the swim team were on Friday. She was stunned that I made callbacks, scheduled for Friday. As a kid, something kept me away from sports, some deep instinct, some voice whispering urgently whenever the opportunity arose, "This is not safe for you." It was one of those instincts that kids try to articulate and that adults quickly, even with a chuckle, dismiss. My mom wanted me to play sports as a social outlet, an antidote to my isolation. She tried hard to get me to join the football team in 8th grade so I wouldn't be the only boy in my class not playing. I'd never thrown a football in my life. Actually, I still haven't. And I knew that the laughter and derision that would ensue after they saw me struggle with the basic mechanics of the game would cut deeper than the status quo. Thinking about the frontrunner today, the relationship between Harlan and Billie strikes me as not just a generational juncture, but as a metaphor for life before and after Stonewall. Harlan's fears resonate with the announcements of athletes who hid or denied themselves from teammates, the prying public, but Billie's courage oozes a little more from each subsequent generation of athletes, each facing fewer and fewer obstacles to reconciling their jobs and their lives. Would my life have been different if, as a child, I'd seen an openly gay athlete compete in the Olympics or on a professional team? Would I be healthier, more fit? Would I be less afraid of straight men? Kids are coming out earlier and earlier. Queer kids, or at least more queer kids, are playing sports now without the hurdles and hangups that I experienced. So yeah, life may have been different. But if I'd joined the volleyball or swim teams, I'd never have butchered the stage manager's monologues every night of Our Town that freshman fall, and I'd never have soloed in Godspell the following spring. I may have put piano playing aside and stunted my understanding and appreciation of music. In that life that didn't happen, I wouldn't have sung at Carnegie Hall or the Rudolfinum. It's not a possibility that I ponder with much regret. The front runner didn't keep me reading because of its reverence for sports, but it did keep me turning the pages because I had never heard a story about gay men that wasn't thoroughly tragic. My mother's first response after I told her I was gay was, "Well, I'm concerned because I've never known a happy homosexual." Happy homosexual, I thought. Be a great name for a musical. Harlan and Billy were more real and more potent to me than any characters I'd encountered before, and Warren didn't reduce them to one-dimensional heroes, villains, or victims. And she didn't skimp when it came to sex. Harlan and Billy presented my first encounter with gay sex. I'd never seen it. I sure hadn't had it by that point, and I'd never even heard it described. Their budding lust and care for each other was familiar, and reading Warren's depiction of the first time they fucked was the most comprehensive sexual education I'd ever had. Another reason the frontrunner grabbed me and maintains a grip on me extended from my personal what ifs. If talented celebrity athletes came out in the 60s and 70s along with folks in other industries and fields, would that have mitigated the burgeoning anti-gay tactics of the far right that picked on queer people and are still picking on queer people? The hate and political pressure embodied in Anita Bryant. Would that have made a difference in the late 70s and 80s as AIDS emerged and spread, as members of Reagan's administration dismissed it, even openly laughed about it, and attitudes like Imogene's in Designing Women dominated, perpetuating the notion that AIDS was killing all the right people? Would there have been more stories like The Frontrunner that depicted the lives and loves and complications of queer people without reducing them to victims or accessories? Would queer people have had more and better models to follow, guides to navigate the changes in our bodies and our desires? These are the possibilities I ponder with so much regret. There's one more reason the front runner kept me turning the pages that night. There was a gay boogie. A couple of days later, after I'd gotten a full, uncaffeinated night's sleep, and I had the house to myself, I cranked up Madonna, and using Harlan's description of the dance floor as an instruction manual, set out to master it. After all, I learned, the gay who is a good dancer can turn even the foxtrot into an uninhibited celebration of male sexuality. So what's your relationship to athleticism and sports? How has the experience of queer people changed over time in your lifetime? How do you want it to change? So I hope you'll let yourself notice what you're feeling particularly grateful for in this moment. For me, gosh, all I can think about is hanging out in my bedroom that night with the door closed, glad that all my housemates were away, trying to learn how to dance gayer. And I'm so grateful for that moment. It wasn't just about learning how to dance, it was learning how to make space for myself, how to teach myself something that nobody around could teach me. So I'm thankful for those moments and for those opportunities. What are you grateful for? What are you thinking about? See you next time.